What would you do if your wife offered you an open marriage? Keep watching. It was supposed to be a perfect night. I stood in front of the bedroom mirror, carefully placing the sapphire bracelet into its velvet box. The deep blue stone shimmered, catching the light just right, a color that reminded me of Hannah's eyes when she smiled. We'd had so many great times together, so many memories stitched into the fabric of our lives. This anniversary dinner was supposed to be a celebration of all that. But lately, things felt different. I brushed the thought away, focusing instead on the evening ahead. Maybe it was just a phase, I told myself. Every relationship had its ups and downs. We had been through our share of challenges, but nothing we couldn't handle. After tonight, after this special dinner, things would get back on track. Hannah had been distant lately, but I chalked it up to work stress. She worked long hours at the firm, and I knew how much pressure she put on herself. I, too, had been guilty of getting lost in my work at times, and I thought this was just her turn to be distracted. Still, a quiet tension lingered in her behavior. There was a hesitancy in her touch, a wandering gaze during conversations that made me feel like I was only half there. But tonight, I was determined to change that. I gave myself one last look in the mirror, adjusting my collar. The table was booked at her favorite restaurant, the bracelet was ready, and I was set on making sure she knew how much she meant to me. We would reminisce about the good times, laugh over a bottle of wine, and put whatever this weird energy was behind us. As I heard her footsteps approach, I smiled to myself. Tonight was going to be the night we reignited the spark. But little did I know, everything was about to change. The restaurant was just as I remembered. Warm lighting, elegant decor, and the soft hum of quiet conversations filling the air. It had always been our place, a little corner of the world, where we could escape the chaos of life. I felt a flicker of hope that this evening would bring us back to that comfort. Hannah sat across from me, her fingers lightly tracing the rim of her wine glass, eyes drifting toward the window. She looked beautiful as always, but there was a distance in her expression that I couldn't ignore. I tried to focus on the moment, on the familiar smell of her perfume, on the fact that we were here together, celebrating another year. "Everything okay?" I asked, trying to break through her distraction. She smiled faintly, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Yeah, just tired," she said a little too quickly. I nodded, choosing not to press. I didn't want to push her. Not tonight. As the waiter brought out our appetizers, I leaned back in my chair, determined to lighten the mood. "Do you remember the first time we came here?" I began, hoping nostalgia might bridge the gap between us. "You were wearing that red dress, and we spent half the night talking about that ridiculous road trip to the mountains." Hannah smiled again, this time a little more genuinely. "Yeah, I remember. It feels like a lifetime ago." There was something in her tone, a wistfulness that unsettled me. I decided to present her with the bracelet early, thinking it might bring her back to the present, to us. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small box. "I got you something," I said, sliding it across the table. Her eyes widened in surprise as she opened it, her fingers gently lifting the bracelet from its case. For a moment, she seemed touched, the way her gaze softened as she ran her thumb over the stones. But then, just as quickly, that same distant look returned. "It's beautiful, Jake," she murmured, but her voice was far away. I tried to shake off the unease creeping into my chest. "Hannah, is everything really okay?" I asked, more firmly this time. She hesitated, and I knew in that moment that something was wrong. Her eyes shifted, as if she was searching for the right words. "Jake, there's something I've been meaning to talk to you about." I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. "Is it about work? Are you stressed?" "No, it's not work," she said, her voice low. It's us." I blinked, trying to wrap my mind around what she was saying. "Us?" I repeated, my heart picking up speed. "What do you mean?" "I don't know how to say this without hurting you," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I've been feeling trapped." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Trapped? We'd been together for years, built a life together. I had no idea she felt this way. Trapped? "I don't. What are you talking about?" She glanced around the room, aware of the people nearby, and lowered her voice further. I've been thinking a lot lately, and I feel like I need space. I need to figure out who I am outside of us." The room felt like it was spinning. I struggled to comprehend what she was saying. "What does that mean? Space? Are you saying you want a break?" "I'm saying I need to explore my freedom, Jake. I need to figure out what makes me happy." I stared at her, the reality sinking in. And I don't make you happy anymore? It's not that, she insisted. I need to find myself. I don't want to hurt you, but I can't ignore how I feel. The word stung. I sat there reeling, trying to stay composed as my mind raced. So what, you want to leave? Just like that? I'm not saying I want to leave for good, she said carefully. I just need some time to think. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The anniversary, the bracelet, this whole night, it was all unraveling in front of me. My jaw tightened. And you thought tonight of all nights was the right time to tell me this? Her eyes filled with regret, but she didn't take it back. I didn't plan for it to come out like this. I clenched my fists under the table, struggling to keep my voice steady. You're saying you want to be free, but from what, Hannah? From us? From me? The silence that followed was deafening. Unable to take any more, I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. Hannah's eyes widened in shock, but I didn't care. I tossed some cash on the table, enough to cover the bill, and walked out without another word. As I stepped into the cool night air, I realized it wasn't just the dinner that had fallen apart. It was everything I thought I knew about us. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? My mind replayed the conversation at the restaurant over and over, each time with more disbelief, more anger. I kept hoping I had misunderstood her, that she hadn't really meant it. But no matter how many ways I tried to twist her words, the message was clear. She wanted out. Or at least, she wanted a version of freedom that didn't include me. The morning sunlight streamed through the blinds, unwelcome and harsh, as I sat on the edge of our bed. Our bed. Except now it felt like hers. Like everything was hers to take or leave as she pleased. The silence in the house was louder than it had ever been, and the empty side of the bed felt like a reminder of the distance that had grown between us. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was Hannah. I stared at her name flashing on the screen, a part of me tempted to ignore it. But the other part, the part that still held on to some shred of hope, picked it up. Jake. Her voice was calm, almost too calm, and it made my chest tighten. I know last night was difficult, but I think we need to talk. Can I come over? I exhaled sharply, my hand gripping the phone. Talk about what, Hannah? You made yourself pretty clear last night. I don't want to leave things like this, she said. I need you to understand where I'm coming from. Where you're coming from? I repeated, anger rising in my throat. Hannah, you dropped a bomb on me during what was supposed to be our anniversary dinner. Do you have any idea how that felt? I didn't want to hurt you, she insisted. But I can't keep pretending that everything's fine when it's not. I closed my eyes, trying to steady myself. Fine. Come over. But I don't think there's much left to say. Half an hour later, I heard her car pull up in the driveway. The familiar sound of the door opening and closing, the click of her heels on the pavement. It all felt surreal, like I was watching my life from the outside. When she walked into the house, her expression was composed, but I could see the tension in her posture. She sat down on the couch, and for a moment, neither of us said anything. The air between us felt thick, heavy with words we hadn't spoken yet. I didn't plan for this to happen, she began softly. I've been struggling with this for a while. You've been struggling? I shot back, unable to hold in the frustration any longer. And you didn't think to talk to me? To let me know what you were feeling before, just springing it on me like that? She sighed, rubbing her temples. I didn't know how to bring it up. I kept hoping it was just a phase, that I'd snap out of it. But the more I ignored it, the worse it got. So, what now? I asked, my voice sharp. You find yourself, while I just sit here, waiting for you to decide whether or not you want to come back. It's not about you waiting for me, she replied, trying to stay calm. I need this time to figure out who I am without feeling like I'm tied down. Tied down? The word stung. Hannah, we've been married for years. How did we go from building a life together to you feeling tied down? She didn't answer right away. Her eyes dropped to the floor, and for the first time, I saw the cracks in her composure. It's not that I don't love you, Jake. I do, but I've changed. I've started wondering about all the things I never did, the life I never explored. I need to know if there's more for me out there. My heart clenched painfully, and I realized there was nothing I could say to change her mind. She had already decided. So where does that leave us? I asked, the finality of the question settling in. Hannah's eyes flickered with regret, but she didn't hesitate. I think we need to separate, just for a while. I need to do this, Jake. I stood up, pacing the room, trying to make sense of the whirlwind in my mind. And if you go, what then? You just walk back and whenever you feel like you've found yourself. This isn't a game, Hannah. This is our marriage. I know it's not a game, she said quietly. But I can't lie to myself, or to you. I need to be honest about where I'm at. I stopped pacing, turning to face her. Then here's my honesty, I said, my voice firm. You can't have both. Either you commit to this marriage, to us, or you move out. But I'm not going to be some backup plan while you go off to find yourself. Hannah blinked, caught off guard by my ultimatum. She opened her mouth as if to argue, but then closed it again. After a long pause, she nodded, her face a mask of resignation. I'll pack some things, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I watched as she headed upstairs, the reality of it all crashing down around me. This wasn't just a fight. This wasn't something that would blow over in a few days. She was really leaving. As the sound of her footsteps faded, I sank onto the couch, staring blankly at the empty space she had just left behind. I thought about the years we had spent together, the plans we had made, the future I had always assumed we would share. Now, all of it was hanging by a thread, unraveling in front of me, and I didn't know how to stop it. The first few days after Hannah left were a blur. The silence in the house felt suffocating, the emptiness palpable in every room. Everywhere I looked, there were reminders of her, her favorite mug still sitting on the kitchen counter, the scarf she'd draped over the chair, the faint scent of her perfume lingering in the air. I couldn't escape it. I had never imagined my life without Hannah, and now that it was happening, I had no idea what to do with myself. I went through the motions, getting up, going to work, eating, but there was no real purpose behind it. I felt like I was floating, disconnected from everything around me. The nights were the worst. Lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, the questions would flood in. What had I missed? How long had she been unhappy? Was there something I could have done to make her stay? But no answers came, only the hollow echo of my thoughts. It took a few weeks before I finally hit my breaking point. One morning, I woke up and realized that I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't keep drowning in the what-ifs and whys. I had to do something, anything, to move forward, even if I didn't know what that looked like yet. That's when I started running. I had never been much of a runner before, but I needed an outlet, something physical to pour all my anger, confusion, and frustration into. The first time I laced up my shoes and hit the pavement, it was brutal. My legs felt like lead, my chest burned, and I had to stop every few minutes just to catch my breath. But it was also the first time in weeks that my mind felt clear. With every step, every thud of my feet against the ground, I felt a little bit lighter. So I kept running. Every morning before work, I would get up early and run through the neighborhood. The rhythm of it became a lifeline, a way to keep myself grounded. Slowly, it started to get easier. My body grew stronger, and with it, so did my resolve. I wasn't running away from my problems. I was running toward something. I just didn't know what it was yet. After a few weeks, I joined a local running group. It was mostly for the social aspect. I needed to be around people to remember what it felt like to connect, even if it was just about pacing or sharing tips. That's where I met Emily. She wasn't the kind of person who immediately stood out in a crowd. There was no dramatic entrance or big personality. She was just present, quiet, but in a way that made you want to listen. We started talking during the runs, mostly about the usual things, how to improve stamina, the best routes in the city, upcoming races. But over time, the conversations became more personal. One morning, as we were cooling down after a particularly tough run, Emily asked me about my story. Not in a prying way, just a genuine curiosity. And for some reason, I told her. I told her about Hannah, about the anniversary dinner, about how blindsided I'd been. "I'm sorry," she said simply when I finished. That must have been really hard. It was the first time someone had acknowledged the pain without trying to offer a solution, and it meant more than I realized. She didn't pity me, and she didn't offer any cliches about how things would get better. She just listened. From then on, we started meeting up outside the group for solo runs. There was something easy about being around Emily, like I didn't have to pretend I was okay when I wasn't. Over time, we talked less about running and more about life. Our pasts, our families, our dreams. I found myself looking forward to our time together, not because I was trying to fill the void Hannah had left, but because I genuinely enjoyed being around her. Emily wasn't a replacement for Hannah. She was something different, something I didn't even know I needed. She helped me see that there was life beyond the wreckage of my marriage, that I was more than just the man Hannah left behind. One day, after a run, we sat on a park bench, the sun beginning to set behind the trees. Emily looked at me, a gentle smile playing on her lips. "You're doing better, you know," she said softly. "You don't talk about her as much anymore." I hadn't even realized it, but she was right. Somewhere along the way, the constant ache I had felt in my chest had started to fade. The questions that had once consumed me no longer haunted my every thought. I had begun to move on. "Yeah," I said, nodding slowly. "I think I am." We sat there in comfortable silence for a while, watching the world go by. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel lost. I wasn't fully healed, I wasn't sure I ever would be, but I was no longer just surviving. I was starting to live again. And in that moment, I realized something else. I didn't miss my old life anymore. The future, once so uncertain and terrifying, now felt like something I could embrace. And maybe, just maybe, that future had room for someone new. At first, freedom felt exhilarating for Hannah. When she left Jake, it was as if a new world had opened up before her, brimming with possibilities she hadn't dared to explore before. No more expectations, no more compromises. She could follow her whims. No need to consider anyone else's feelings. For a while, that was enough to keep her going. She spent her days roaming the city, discovering new coffee shops, signing up for photography classes, even trying yoga for the first time. Her friends applauded her decision, calling her brave for choosing to find herself. They told her she'd done the right thing by stepping away from a life that no longer felt exciting. Hannah soaked it all in, convinced she had broken free from something that had been holding her back. But as the days turned into weeks, the initial thrill began to fade. The quiet moments in her apartment became suffocating. The late nights out with friends felt repetitive, and the freedom she had sought started to lose its appeal. Slowly, a deep sense of unease crept in, one she had not anticipated. The world she had longed for, free from commitment, wasn't turning out the way she imagined. Hannah tried dating again, thinking that maybe the excitement of new people would reignite her spark. There were plenty of men, handsome, charming, and adventurous, but most of them only wanted something fleeting, a temporary thrill. None of them wanted the kind of connection she had once shared with Jake. They saw her as nothing more than a fun distraction, and over time, Hannah began to feel the same about herself. Temporary, unimportant. At night, the weight of her choices pressed down on her. The novelty of being on her own had worn off, and the quiet of her apartment became a constant reminder of what she had left behind. She began thinking about Jake more often than she cared to admit. How was he doing? Was he as lost as she was? Had he found his own kind of freedom, or was he still waiting for her to figure things out? As the loneliness deepened, she considered reaching out to him. Maybe, just maybe, they could talk. Every time her phone buzzed, her heart would skip a beat, hoping it was Jake. But it never was. In her moments of weakness, she wondered if he was thinking about her too. Yet something in her held back. She had been the one to leave. It didn't feel right to ask for another chance, not when she was still so uncertain about what she truly wanted. One evening, curiosity got the best of her. She opened Jake's social media, her fingers trembling as she scrolled through his posts. And there it was, a photo of Jake, standing next to a woman Hannah didn't recognize. They looked happy. Jake's smile was wide and genuine, the kind that used to light up his face when they were together. The woman was leaning into him, her arm wrapped around his, and the image struck Hannah with a force she hadn't expected. Her breath caught in her throat. This wasn't what she had envisioned. She had imagined Jake grieving, waiting, maybe even hoping for her return. But here he was, clearly moving on, his life no longer revolving around her absence. He seemed lighter, as if the burden of their broken marriage had been lifted from his shoulders. Hannah felt the sting of regret, a sharp, undeniable pang that made her stomach turn. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. She had left to find herself, to explore the life she felt she was missing. But now, staring at the image of Jake with someone new, she realized the gravity of her choices. She had walked away from the one person who had always been there for her, believing there was something better out there. And now, she was the one left behind. The freedom she had chased no longer felt liberating. Instead, it felt like a cage, one of her own making. The life she had romanticized wasn't fulfilling her the way she had imagined it would. And Jake, he had found a way to move on without her. That night, for the first time in months, Hannah allowed herself to break down. The tears came in a rush, overwhelming her. She cried for everything she had lost, for the man she had hurt, and for the life she had so recklessly thrown away. She had believed that time apart would give her clarity, but instead it had only left her more confused, more alone. She thought about calling Jake, about explaining everything and asking for his forgiveness. But deep down, she knew that it wouldn't be enough. She had broken something between them, something fragile and important, and no words could easily repair it. Besides, it was clear that Jake had found his own path to healing, and maybe, just maybe, he was happier now without her. Hannah spent the rest of the night in the stillness of her apartment, grappling with the weight of her choices. She had wanted freedom, but all it had brought her was a profound sense of loss. And now, as she stared at the life she had left behind, she was no longer sure if she could ever find her way back to the happiness she had once known. "I never thought I'd be here, feeling okay." For months after Hannah left, I wasn't sure I'd ever find my way back to myself. The loneliness was suffocating, and everything reminded me of what I had lost. I went through the motions, tried to keep myself busy, but nothing really helped. At least, not until I started running. It sounds cliché, but running became my escape. Each morning, I'd throw on my sneakers and head out, trying to outrun the memories, the hurt. At first, it was about getting out of my own head, but eventually, it became about something else, about moving forward. Little by little, step by step, I started to feel more like myself again. That's when I met Emily. She joined the running group I'd been going to, just another face among the crowd at first. I didn't think much of it then, but as we started talking during those early morning runs, something shifted. She wasn't like the people who tried to offer me advice or empty words of comfort. She just listened. And in return, I found myself opening up in ways I hadn't with anyone else. I told her about Hannah, about the way everything had unraveled so suddenly. Emily didn't pity me, didn't offer some well-meaning platitude about how it would all be okay. She just understood. She had her own baggage, her own story, and that made it easier to talk to her. We weren't trying to fix each other. We were just there. It was a slow burn, our friendship. But it wasn't long before I found myself looking forward to seeing her, not because I needed a distraction, but because I genuinely enjoyed being around her. There was something easy about Emily, a simplicity in the way she approached life that I hadn't experienced in a long time. One night after a run, we grabbed dinner together. Nothing fancy, just a little bistro near the park, but I realized something as we sat there talking and laughing. I wasn't thinking about Hannah. I wasn't caught up in the hurt or the questions. For the first time in months, I was fully present in the moment. It hit me then, I was healing. Emily looked at me across the table, her eyes soft but curious. "You seem lighter lately," she said. "Like something's changed." I smiled at her, realizing she was right. "I think something has," I admitted. "For the first time in a while, I'm not thinking about what I've lost. I'm just here." She smiled back, and in that moment, I felt a warmth I hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't just friendship anymore. It was more. And for the first time since everything had fallen apart, I realized I was ready for it. I was ready for whatever was next. A few days later, I made a decision I'd been avoiding for months. I filed for divorce. It wasn't an easy step, but it was the right one. Hannah and I were done. I had grieved for what we had, for what I thought we would be, but it was time to let go of the past and move on. When the papers were served to Hannah, I expected some kind of reaction. Maybe a call, maybe an email, something. But nothing came. I took that as a sign that she had moved on too. Part of me felt relief, like the clean break I needed was finally happening. But then, out of nowhere, Hannah called. Hearing her voice again, after all this time, stirred something in me. But it wasn't the rush of emotions I would have expected. I wasn't filled with hope or longing, or anything I had felt in the early days of our separation. Instead, I felt calm, centered. I let her talk, unsure of where she was going with it. "Jake," she began softly, "I got the papers." I stayed silent, waiting for her to continue. "I've been thinking a lot," she said, her voice hesitant. "And I realize now that I made a mistake. Leaving it was wrong. I miss you. Can we meet? Talk things over." For a brief second, her words hit me like a wave. But the impact wasn't what I would have expected a few months ago. It was like hearing an echo of a past I had already moved on from. I didn't feel the need to fix things or rewind to the way we were. I had changed. I had healed. And I knew, without a doubt, that going back wasn't an option. "Hannah," I said, my voice steady, "I'm sorry, but it's too late for that." There was silence on the other end, and I could almost feel her struggling with what I'd just said. She had always been the one to call the shots, the one in control. But this time I wasn't going to bend. "I've moved on," I continued, my voice soft but firm. "I'm happy now, and I want you to find happiness too. But I can't go back." The conversation ended shortly after, and when I hung up, I stood there for a moment, letting it all sink in. This was closure, real closure. Not just a chapter ending, but the whole book closing. I wasn't angry anymore or bitter. I didn't hold any resentment toward Hannah. In fact, I hoped she would find the peace she was searching for. But as for me, I was done. That evening, I met up with Emily for a run, like we had been doing for months. As we jogged side by side, the cool breeze brushing against us, I felt a sense of freedom that I hadn't felt in a long time. This time, it wasn't about running away from the past or trying to fix the broken pieces of my life. It was about running toward something new, something real. Emily glanced over at me, a smile playing on her lips. "You seem lighter today," she said, her voice teasing but kind. I smiled back at her, nodding. "I am." And in that moment, I knew that I wasn't just moving on, I was moving forward. With Emily by my side, for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. For a moment, I thought she might argue, might try to convince me otherwise. But instead, she just nodded, a resigned look on her face. I guess I didn't realize what I had until it was too late. I didn't have anything more to say. We sat in silence for a while, both of us coming to terms with the finality of it all. Eventually, I stood up, ready to leave. "Take care, Hannah," I said, meaning it. She looked up at me, sadness in her eyes. "You too, Jake." As I walked out of the coffee shop and into the bright afternoon, I felt a strange sense of peace. The confrontation, the closure, everything about it felt right. I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. I was simply done. And that felt good.